Hello everybody. So today in this video I'm just going to demonstrate how to make a classic white Danish white bread. It's only 6 ingredients. I'm actually going to use 7, but that's because I like to mix my oil and butter together instead of just having butter because of costs and flavor and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm just going to show you how I make it as a baker at home. This recipe is going to be double the recipe, so it's not just for a single loaf, but I will attach the link in the notes for this recipe, which is just for 1 loaf of bread. And it's also available in metric and in US customary and in Danish and in English. So, you know, you can, if you're in America and you use cups, you can use cups for this. I've already measured it out. If you use grams, you can use grams. If you speak Danish, you can get it in Danish. And if you speak English, obviously you can have it in English. But yeah, so I'll just show you how I do this. This is how the order that I do it at home. So first off, I have 464 grams. This is double the recipe. So 464 grams of room temperature water. And then I also have 16 grams of sugar. And I mix that with the water. And then I put in the yeast. Normally I actually, it depends, but normally in Denmark we have fresh yeast. And that's usually used instead. But this is just dry yeast because that's what I have on hand right now. And yeast likes sugar, so I just pour it in with the sugar. And then from there, so yeast doesn't like salt and yeast doesn't like fat because those inhibit it, it restricts it. So from there I will add my flour, and this will be 800 grams of flour. Okay, and then I'm just gonna make a little bit of a basin in it, just because I don't want the oil or the salt to be leaking down. I mean, the whole reason I created this barrier was, you know, so that it wouldn't touch the yeast. And if it does, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. Like, it's okay. Your bread will still turn out. All right, so then we have 16 grams of salt. And then we'll have 40 grams of fat. And in the recipe it says butter. I'm going to do 20 grams of butter and 20 grams of oil. This is just to cut costs. I also like the texture a little bit better when I add half and half instead. Okay. And now I'll mix it. So I'll stop this video and I'll mix it for 8 minutes on slow and 8 minutes on high, and then I'll show you what the texture of the dough looks like. Alright, so the dough has now mixed for 8 minutes on slow, and I misspoke earlier, it's 8 minutes on medium, because that is what it would be in a home mixer, is medium speed. So I'm just going to show you the texture of the dough really quick so that you have this for reference. It sticks a little bit to this plastic spatula, but not too much. Same with your fingers, you know. Right now this is starting to form, it's starting to dry out a little bit on top, so I'm going to pull this over so you can see the fresh dough. It will stick slightly to my finger, but not anything too crazy. And then I can even take a piece of the dough and do a gluten window test and just kind of stretch it out. Just a little bit at a time. And I mean, it's kind of hard to see because there isn't any light behind it, but if I pull it up for me and I look on the side, I can actually see a little bit through the dough before it tears. And that's where you want it. You want to be able to see through the dough without it tearing, because if it just pulls apart, then the gluten hasn't developed enough yet. and it won't raise correctly. It'll be kind of lumpy when it raises. It'll still taste good, but it'll be a little lumpy. It won't be quite as pretty and easy to handle. So anyway, what I'm just gonna do is I'm just gonna put a doubled over tea towel over this. You can also put plastic. I mean, if you have a lid, that's even better. If you have something that keeps it in, even better. But I've found when it comes to just basic home stuff without having to buy anything extra, and stuff that I always have on hand, I always have a towel for drying my hands, and I just double it over and cover the dough, and that usually does pretty good at making sure that the top of the dough doesn't dry out. And I'm only going to let it rest for 15 minutes. That's the great thing about this Danish white bread recipe, is it's only 15 minutes of resting time before we shape the dough. So anyway, I'll pause the video and then we'll come back in 15 minutes and I'll show you how to shape the dough. Okay, so we're back and I have portioned off a single piece of dough. I divided it in half, and this is about 680 grams or so. 683, 684 or 5. So I just lightly dust the surface with flour. And it doesn't matter too much how the shape starts, because we are gonna force the dough to be an end shape. And I'm gonna take my bracelet off and my watch because this tends to get a little bit dirty. So to start off with, I'm just gonna press the dough out. And if it sticks to me too much, I can get a little bit of flour on my fingers. And then, depending on the shape of your dough, depends on where you start. So this is a little bit longer than tall. So I'm gonna start by pulling it out and folding it into the middle. If it was a little bit taller, or if it was like a perfect square or a circle, I would have actually just started with a third fold first. And then from here, I'll push that down and I'll fold it in thirds. And I can use the butt of my palm. When I'm doing this really quick, I use the butt of my palm, but when I'm doing it slow, I use the tips of my fingers. And then I'll do in third again. And then from here, I will just roll it in under itself. And using the sides of my thumb, I'm gonna just kind of tighten it, push it nice and tight under itself. And then roll it out like a log so that it will fit to the shape of bread pan that I have. And I just try to get it as even as possible. That's sticking to me a little bit, but I just try to get it as even as possible. It should stick ever so slightly to the surface and to your fingers a little bit, but not too much. And now you can see the bottom seam. This is the bottom. That's the seam. It's pretty good. And it's a little bit, you can see how it's relaxing really fast. So that tells me that I need to maybe make it a little bit tighter. Because the dough's a little wrinkly, so that now I need to make it a little bit tighter. So I'm just going to roll it in under itself again so that it makes a nice, smooth, relatively smooth top. And then the ends, they'll be kind of spiraled. And to adjust the size, you can see how it's a little bit, you know, thicker out here or thinner out here and thicker in the middle. You can literally just push it around because it's dough. It's pretty malleable. And I have an oiled form, and you can see that it passes pretty good to the bread form, but maybe it's a little bit too big. That's okay. I'm just going to grab it and put it in there. And so now when the bread raises, it'll fill it up. Depending on the heat, the amount of heat that you use depends on how long it takes. But we want it so that the bread comes over the edge of the pan by, about an inch or so. And that's when it's ready to bake. So what I'm going to do is I am going to turn on my oven on the very lowest because it's cold today, so I can't go out and set it in the sun. So I'm gonna actually first dust it with flour. I'm gonna dust the top of flour so that I can cover it with a tea towel. You can also use a plastic bag, which is ideal for keeping in humidity, but oftentimes the edges will stick to the plastic bag, and that's unfortunate. But I'm just going to turn my oven to the lowest setting possible, and I'm going to cover the bread with a tea towel, and then I'm going to let it raise, and I'll start with 20 minutes, and then I'll check on it. And then I'll probably just preheat my oven. And then while that's preheating, I'll let it raise for anywhere between 15 minutes to 25 minutes. It typically takes, it typically takes about 35 minutes for this dough to raise at home in my oven. It might take longer today because it's a rainy day. It might take less time. It's hard to tell because we're not in the most controlled environment possible. So I just kind of just keep an eye on it and set a timer. And then I'll show you what it looks like when we get to that point. Okay, so here's the bread after it's raised. This one took actually a lot longer than it normally does. It's a lot colder today. We're heading into fall. So that's honestly not unexpected, but it took over an hour for it to get to this point. So as you can see, it's risen above the edge of the pan, the bread pan, and because I have a conventional oven, I don't have a induction or like what is that called? I can't remember what type of oven it is, where the oven like spins air around, because I don't have one that circulates air. Convection, there we go. Because I don't have a convection oven, I'm not going to cut the top. But if I did have a convection oven, it would be important that I score the top, because the air will cause it to spring up. But in a conventional oven, it won't do that. It rarely does it. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray the tops with some water, the top of the bread. Just really nice, even, thick coat of water, and then I'm going to stick it in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius for about 30-35 minutes. And then I'll show you what I do after that. Alright, so the bread has baked. It actually ended up baking for about 40 minutes, but that is due to me being preoccupied when they needed to come out. So that was my mistake. So they're a little bit darker on top than they should be. But nonetheless, I can show you what they should sound like when they come out of the oven. So if you tap the top, so that's with a nail, without a nail, sounds hollow. Then you flip it over. So this one's a little bit harder, because now there's not a thick crust, so then I like to kind of slap it, and it should sound hollow. And if it sounds hollow, which it does, then it's done. So there's the bread, it's all finished. This time you can see that the flour on top, it's pretty sparse. And that's because after I sprayed it with water, I didn't put flour on top of it, which you can do if you want a heavier flour surface. But it's entirely up to you. But yeah, that is Danish white bread.